Hello, class. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 16, which is the digestive system. Now, ingestion of food is the first step in the important and complex biological processes that begin when we consume a meal. Nutrients undergo three forms of processing in the body: digestion, absorption, and metabolism. Digestion and absorption are performed by organs of the digestive system. Now, metabolism, however, is performed by all body cells. So in this video, we're going to list and describe the four layers of the wall of the alimentary canal. Compare the lining layer in the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Define and contrast mechanical and chemical digestion. Discuss the basics of carbohydrate, protein, and fat digestion, and give the end products of each process. We will list and sequence each of the component parts or segments of the alimentary canal from the mouth to the anus and identify the accessory organs of digestion. We'll be able to define peristalsis, bolus, chyme, jaundice, ulcer, and diarrhea. So the principal structure of the digestive system is this irregular long tube called the alimentary canal. The term gastrointestinal or GI tract technically refers only to the portion that includes the stomach and intestines, but is often used to designate the entire digestive tract. In adults, this tube is 29 feet long, or 9 meters. The main organs of the digestive system are mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anal canal. These are the main organs. The accessory organs of digestion are the salivary glands, tongue, teeth, tonsils, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and appendix. Food must first be digested, which is broken down, and absorbed, which is performed by the organs of the digestive system. And again, metabolism is performed by all body cells. It is not specific to the GI tract or organs. So this shows you the location of the digestive organs and the accessory organs. And again, I'm not going to have you label, but you need to know where things are in terms of being able to understand it in a sentence or in a question. So, ingestion. So this is complex foods taken into the GI tract. Digestion is a group of processes that break complex nutrients into simpler ones. We have mechanical digestion, which breaks large chunks of food into smaller bits. And then we have chemical digestion, which breaks large molecules into smaller ones. Motility is several GI movements resulting from muscular contraction. Examples of this is peristalsis and segmentation. Now let's talk about secretion, absorption, and regulation. Secretion is the release of digestive juices and hormones that facilitate digestion. Absorption is the movement of digested nutrients into the internal environment of the body. And regulation is neural, hormonal, and other mechanisms that regulate digestive activity. So the wall of the digestive tract. The digestive tract describes as the tube that extends from the mouth to the anus. The wall is formed by 4 layers of tissue. The mucosa or mucous membrane. This is in the esophagus. It is made of a tough abrasion-resistant stratified epithelium. In the stomach, small intestine, and large intestine, it is made up of a delicate layer of simple columnar epithelium so that it can absorb nutrients and secrete mucus. The submucosa layer connects tissue layer that lies between the mucosa and the muscularis, or the muscular layer. It contains many blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. The muscularis is the muscular layer. This is the circular, longitudinal, and oblique in the stomach layers of muscle that are important in GI motility. Peristalsis comes because of the muscularis layer. Peristalsis is defined as a wave-like movement that pushes food down the tract. Segmentation is the back and forth movement. Next, we have the serosa, or the peritoneum. This is a serous membrane that covers the outside of the abdominal organs. It attaches the digestive tract to the wall of the abdominal pelvic cavity by forming folds called mesenteries. So, in order from the inside walls of the digestive tract to the outside, there are 4 layers. First, mucosa or mucous membrane. Second, submucosa. Third is muscularis. And the fourth, finally, is the serosa. So this shows, in order, again, let me say this again. In order from inside out is the mucosa or mucous membrane, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. And this is a good image that shows where things are in relation to others. This shows peristalsis, which is the muscular contraction that moves a bolus along. A bolus is that big, large chunk of food. So you can see where a ring of contraction occurs where the GI wall is stretched, the bolus is pushed forward, then the moving bolus triggers a ring of contraction in the next region that pushes the bolus even farther. The ring of contraction moves like a wave along the GI tract to push the bolus forward. This is peristalsis. This occurs in our esophagus, and peristalsis also occurs in our intestines. Segmentation is where it's a back and forth movement to try to break it down into smaller and smaller, basically chopping it into smaller chunks. So let's first talk about the mouth, the structure of the oral cavity. We have the roof of our mouth. This is formed by the hard palate, parts of the maxillary and palatine bones, and soft palate, an arch-shaped muscle separating the mouth from the pharynx. In the middle, we have this uvula that drops down. It's that downward projection of the soft palate. This uvula, along with the soft palate, prevent food and liquid from entering the nasopharynx and the nasal cavities of the mouth. Then we have the floor of the mouth. This is formed by the tongue and its muscles. We have papillae, which are small elevations on the mucosa of the tongue that consist of taste buds and found in many papillae. We have the lingual frenulum, which is, if you lift your tongue up, you'll see this little fold of mucous membrane that anchors the tongue to the floor of the mouth. This shows an example of what we just talked about and of the different teeth and gums and ducts and where the lips are in relation of everything to one another. Now moving on to the teeth. The typical tooth has 3 main parts: crown, neck, and root. Crown is the top, the neck is the middle, and the root is the bottom that is in the gums. Enamel covers the crown. It is the hardest tissue in the body. Cavities are known as dental caries or tooth decay. And periodontal membrane lines each tooth socket and anchors the tooth to the bone. Inflammation and infection of this is known as periodontitis. Now, the gingiva or gums are not part of the teeth. It's what the teeth sit in. And inflammation of the gingiva is known as gingivitis. So here you can see the three parts that make up the tooth: the crown, the neck, and the root. You can see the root canal that goes down. Now, we have different types of teeth. We have incisors, we have canines or cuspids, we have premolars or bicuspids, and we have molars or tricuspids. There's a set of 20 teeth called deciduous or baby teeth. The average age cutting the first tooth is about 6 months old, and the set completes about 30 months. Then, as we age, we get our 32 permanent teeth. The average age to cut the first permanent tooth is around 6 years old, and the set completed usually between 17 and 24 years old. Now, the salivary glands consist of saliva. This is an exocrine gland secretion that flows into ducts. Serous type of saliva is watery and contains enzymes called salivary amylase, but no mucus. It's produced by serous type secretory cells. Then we have the mucus type of saliva. This is thick, slippery, and contains mucus but no enzymes. The mucus type saliva lubricates fluid during mastication. Mastication is the act of chewing, and it is produced by mucus type of secretory cells. Now let's talk about our parotid glands. These are the largest salivary glands that lie inferior and anterior to each ear at the angle of the jaw. It produces serous type of saliva, and an infection of the parotids is called mumps. Then we have our submandibular glands. This is a mixed gland that produces both serous type or enzymes, amylase, and mucus type, no enzyme, saliva. This is located below the mandibular angle, and ducts open on either side of the lingual frenulum. Our sublingual glands produce only mucus type saliva, and there's multiple ducts open in the floor of the mouth. Here you can see where the parotid duct and parotid glands are, submandibular gland and ducts, sublingual gland. Next is the pharynx. This is a tube-like structure made of muscle lined with a mucous membrane. It is located behind the nasal cavities and mouth. It functions as part of both the respiratory and digestive systems. There's 3 anatomic components of the pharynx. We have the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The oropharynx is most involved segment in the digestive process of swallowing, also known as deglutition. Regulation of deglutition movements or swallowing movements via motor cortex of the cerebrum are voluntary, and the deglutition center of the brainstem, which is involuntary. So again, here's the pharynx. Now, the esophagus is a collapsible muscular mucus-lined tube that's about 10 inches or 25 centimeters long. It connects the pharynx to the stomach. It is the dynamic passageway for food. Mucus glands and the mucosal lining of the esophagus produce mucus that lubricates the tube to permit easier passage of the bolus on its journey to the stomach. Then it goes into what's called the upper esophageal sphincter. This helps prevent air from entering the tube during respiration. And the lower esophageal sphincter is where food enters the stomach by passing through the LES, also known as the cardiac sphincter. Now, it seems misleading, but the cardiac sphincter is actually the lower esophageal sphincter. Has nothing to do with the heart, but it is close to the heart, and I think that's why they call it that. Now, the stomach. The stomach expands after a large meal, about the size of a large sausage when it's empty. Food enters the stomach through that cardiac sphincter. The fundus is the enlarged portion to the left of and above the opening of the esophagus in the stomach. The body of the stomach is the central region, and the pyloric sphincter muscle closes the opening between the pylorus, which is the lower part of the stomach, and the duodenum or duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. Very important. Now, the stomach wall has many smooth muscle fibers, and contractions produce churning movements or peristalsis within the stomach. The lining is mucous membrane. It has many microscopic glands that secrete gastric juice and hydrochloric acid into the stomach. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of 4. It is extremely acidic. The mucous membrane lies in folds known as rugae when the stomach is empty to protect the stomach wall from that extremely acidic hydrochloric acid. The stomach is one of the strongest internal organs. It breaks chunks of food into tiny particles and to thoroughly mix them with gastric juice to form a semi-solid mixture called chyme. Gastric juice is mostly hydrochloric acid, which again is extremely acidic. So here you can see where the esophagus goes. You can see where the LES or the cardiac sphincter is. There's the fundus of the stomach. Goes down into the body. You can see the different layers. The rugae, the folds, the pylorus, and then the pylorus sphincter empties into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. The small intestine is about 7 meters or 20 feet long, but only 2 centimeters or so in diameter or around. We have divisions of it. We have the duodenum, which is the C-shaped and where most chemical digestion occurs. Hydrochloric acid and chyme mixed with pancreatic enzymes and bile mix right here. This is the site of ulcers frequently occur in the duodenum, so duodenal ulcers. Then we go into the jejunum, and then finally into the ileum of the small intestine. So you can see here where it shows the layers of everything, but I want you to look right down on B. There's the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. Then it goes into the jejunum, and then it goes into the ileum. The ileum is the last part of the small intestine that goes, and it actually joins with the large intestine in something called the ileocecal valve. Now, the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, the feces is very liquid in this state. Okay, if it's anywhere in the small intestine, it doesn't firm up and become the typical more semi-solid, kind of soft formed stool until it's in the large intestine. The small intestine contains smooth muscle fibers that contract to produce peristalsis and segmentation movements. The lining is mucous membrane. There are many microscopic glands called intestinal glands that secrete intestinal juice. And then there's little villi. These are microscopic finger-shaped projections from surface of the mucosa in the intestinal cavity. They contain blood and lymph capillaries. Next is the liver and the gallbladder. The liver is the largest gland. It fills the upper right section of the abdominal cavity and extends over to the left side. It is an organ, but it is also a gland. The liver removes yellowish bile pigments formed by the breakdown of hemoglobin from old red blood cells. The liver secretes bile continuously. If there is no chyme in the duodenum, the circular muscles remain contracted and the bile backs up into the common bile duct, into the cystic duct that leads to the gallbladder where the bile is stored. Now, fats in the chyme trigger the secretion of a hormone called cholecystokinin, CCK. As fat enters the small intestine, through the duodenum, it triggers the small intestine's mucosa to secrete the hormone cholecystokinin. The CCK then travels through the blood and promotes contraction of the gallbladder. As a result, bile is released from the gallbladder into the cystic duct, which connects to the common bile duct, which empties into the duodenum. The cholecystokinin, or the CCK, is a hormone that helps regulate digestive tract motility. Next is the gallbladder. This is located on the undersurface of the liver, and again, it stores bile. Bile contains cholesterol and bile salts that break up or emulsifies fats. Without bile, we could not break down fats. Now, there are ducts that we have talked about. The hepatic duct drains bile from the liver. The cystic duct is the duct by which bile enters and leaves the gallbladder. And the common bile duct is formed by union of the hepatic and cystic ducts. The common bile duct drains bile from the hepatic or cystic ducts into the duodenum. And you can see that here, where the hepatic duct and the cystic ducts join to form the common bile duct that goes down in the duodenum. You can also see that the pancreatic duct joins as well there. Now, the pancreas is an exocrine gland that lies behind the stomach. Pancreatic cells secrete pancreatic juice, which is the most important digestive juice, into the pancreatic ducts. The main duct empties into the duodenum. Pancreatic islets, or the islets of Langerhans. Cells are not connected with the pancreatic ducts. They secrete hormones, glucagon, and insulin into the blood. Now, I will say before we move on, the pancreas does secrete a lot of enzymes. You have amylase and lipase, which are very, very important in digestion. Now let's talk more about the large intestine. The large intestine is about 5 feet long. There are divisions. Food enters through the small intestine, the ileum, through that ileocecal valve into the cecum. The colon is then called ascending, which goes up, traverse, which is across, descending goes down. The S-shaped is the sigmoid rectum that goes down into the anus. So make sure you know this. Again, you need to know the description. You don't have to label, but if you don't know the description, you're going to have a really, really hard time with this right here. So, food material enters the right side of the body in the ascending colon from the cecum, then goes up and through the hepatic flexure, also known as the right colic, which bends into and becomes the transverse colon, which goes across the abdomen, then turns downward on the left side of the body at the splenic flexure, or the left colic, which turns into the descending colon, which eventually becomes a little larger shaped sigmoid colon into the rectum. The external opening is called the anus. Now, the large intestine wall contains smooth muscle fibers that contract to produce this churning peristalsis and eventually leads to defecation. The lining of the large intestine is mucous membrane. And this is that image that I just described, where it comes in from the ileum through the ileocecal valve into the cecum. You can see the little appendix, worm-like structure hanging off. And then as we go up the ascending colon, then it goes towards the right, which is the hepatic flexure, which goes across the abdomen, and that's called the transverse colon, which eventually turns at the splenic flexure on the left side, goes all the way down, called the descending colon, until it gets this slightly bigger S-shaped sigmoid colon, goes into the rectum, then goes out through the anal sphincter muscle, out the anus. And you got that fatty mesentery and all of the blood supply there. Now the appendix. This is technically called the vermiform appendix. It is a worm-like tubular structure. The appendix directly attached to the back of the cecum. It contains blind tube-like interior lumen that communicates with the lumen of the large intestine. Now, there's no real important digestive function in humans, but studies are now saying that it might have some type of immune function for us. However, the appendix can serve as an incubator or a breeding ground for non-pathogenic bacteria. Non-pathogenic means that it normally doesn't cause infection. However, if these bacteria that normally don't cause infections get trapped and back up in that appendix, it starts to swell and becomes a problem. It can cause an infection and inflammation that we call appendicitis. And if the appendix ruptures, it can leak all of that bacteria and feces into the abdomen, cause peritonitis, which can make people extremely sick and unfortunately can be deadly. Now, the peritoneum is a continuous serous membrane lining the abdominal cavity and covering the abdominal organs. We have the parietal layer, which lines the abdominal cavity, and the visceral layer, which covers the abdominal organs. The perineal space is the space between the parietal and visceral layers. Organs that are outside of the parietal peritoneum are said to be retroperitoneal. An example of this would be our kidneys. The kidneys are retroperitoneal. Now, there are extensions of the peritoneum. One is the mesentery. This is an extension of parietal peritoneum, which attaches most of the small intestines to the posterior abdominal wall. Then we have something called the greater omentum. This is like a lace apron that hangs down from the lower edge of the stomach and the transverse colon over the intestines. X-rays of the GI tract, so radiopaque contrast medium used to help visualize structures and study images can be used. We use a lot of different kinds, and we'll talk about these more in future courses. So here's an image of the peritoneum. So make sure you get a good idea of where the mesentery, the greater omentum, or that lace apron is, the visceral peritoneum, parietal peritoneum, peritoneal space. Now, retroperitoneal, you'll notice that includes the urinary bladder, the rectum, and also the kidneys, which are not shown here. Pancreas is retroperitoneal, so is the duodenum. So it just gives you a good visual. So the basics of digestion. So digestion transforms food foods into substances that can be absorbed and used by cells. Mechanical digestion. This includes chewing, which is called mastication, swallowing, which is called deglutition, and peristalsis, which breaks food into tiny particles, mix them well with digestive juices, and moves them along the digestive tract. Now, the chemical digestion is where it breaks up large food molecules into compounds that have smaller molecules brought about by enzymes, digestive enzymes. These consist of numerous chemical reactions catalyzed by enzymes in saliva, gastric juice, pancreatic juice, and intestinal juice. So here you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So water goes through osmosis, minerals through active transport. But then if you notice here in purple, green, and yellow, there's a lot that have to happen before it can actually go back and forth across into the blood capillaries and the lymph capillaries and wherever it needs to go. So let's talk about this some more. Enzymes are functional protein molecules that act as catalyst for the digestion of food through hydrolysis. Enzymes are mostly very selective and speed up the breakdown of specific nutrients by specific enzymes. The names of many enzymes end with the suffix ase, combined with the word that describes the type of substance involved in the chemical reaction. An example, lipase is a lipid digesting enzyme. In other words, it breaks down fats in oils. Proteases break down proteins into smaller molecules. So carbohydrate digestion, this occurs mainly in the small intestine, and it uses a pancreatic enzyme called amylase. Amylase breaks down polysaccharides or starches into disaccharides or double sugars. So polysaccharides are starches. There's a lot of sugars, so it breaks it down into double sugars. Then we have the intestinal juice enzymes. Maltase digests maltose or malt sugar. Sucrase digests sucrose or ordinary cane sugar. And lactase digests lactose or milk sugar. That's why if you're lactose intolerant, that's why we named it that, because of the lactose, right? Remember, lactase is lactose or milk sugar enzyme. Very little digestion of carbohydrates occurs before food reaches the small intestine. The end products of carbohydrate digestion are the monosaccharides, which are the simplest sugars. Very important. Now, protein digestion. This starts in the stomach. It is completed in the small intestine. And protein digestion happens because of the enzyme pepsin. This is a gastric juice enzyme that partially digests proteins. Then trypsin is a pancreatic enzyme that continues the digestion of proteins, followed by peptidases, which are intestinal enzymes that complete the digestion of partially digested proteins and converts them into amino acids. Fat digestion. Bile contains no enzymes, but it emulsifies or breaks down fat droplets into very small droplets and only released in the small intestine. Pancreatic lipase then changes the emulsified fats to fatty acids and glycerol in the small intestine. Now, nutrient absorption is a process by which digested food moves from the intestine into the blood or the lymph. Foods and most water, minerals, and vitamins are absorbed from the small intestine. Some water and vitamin K are also absorbed from the large intestine. Fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. I think of ADEC. Fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. All other vitamins are water-soluble, which means that A, D, E, and K are stored in fat. Okay. Don't know what happened there. Here we go. So some terms to know. Bolus is the ball of food moved involuntarily from the mouth to the stomach. Chyme is when food is mixed with gastric juices and broken into a semi-solid form. Jaundice is the yellowish skin discoloration caused by bile buildup in the blood and tissues. An ulcer are lesions that destroy the stomach or the intestinal lining and can cause serious complications. They can even perforate and leak hydrochloric acid from the stomach into the abdomen, which is deadly. Not to mention, ulcers bleed, so there's a lot of bleeding that comes from that. And then diarrhea are stools or fecal matter that become more fluid. Constipation is when you're backed up and they're too firm. There's not enough water in them. Okay. So that ends our chapter 16 of the digestive system. Keep studying and reviewing, and I will speak with you in the next one.